The Early Days with Bikram and Barkan, Part 4. Now, before we continue, I have an announcement to make. This episode is our, drumroll, 200th episode. So I want to thank all of you for supporting the channel over these years. Everyone that's been on the channel with me, there's too many to name. And I also want to thank my editor, Rochelle, who's in the Philippines. She's been with me almost from the very beginning. So thank you, Rochelle, for all your amazing editing skills. The first 3 episodes, I talked about what it was like to take class with Bikram. First, when I was in Beverly Hills, Bikram would come to South Florida and guest teach. I'd go back to Los Angeles and teach for Bikram, and what it was like to be around Bikram during those early days. And now as we move ahead in time to the late 1990s, early 2000s, Bikram's teacher training programs are getting more popular. Now there are Bikram teachers sprouting up all over the world. Before we continue on, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell. If you're enjoying this video, smash the like button. Any comments or questions, put them down below. I'm happy to get back to you. And I saw a trend starting to happen with the Bikram teachers. And again, I'm generalizing, not all of them. And a lot of the senior Bikram teachers went on and continue to this day to be extraordinary teachers and communicators. I'm just talking about, here we are back in the early 2000s. After the year 2000 actually is when it started. And what happened was many of the Bikram teachers, especially the new ones coming out of the teacher training programs, were emulating Bikram's very tough disciplinarian side. Some of them very strict. You couldn't drink water until they told you it was time to drink water. If you were feeling dizzy, you weren't allowed to leave the room. If you did, you couldn't come back. There were a lot of these strict rules that were being implemented in place. And I found that many of the teachers back then, their main focus was on the discipline. Their main focus was on enforcing the discipline. And I found that as a disconnect. Disconnect who Bikram really was. A disconnect how Bikram really taught his class. Now, Bikram was tough. He was a disciplinarian. God forbid you didn't do what he told you to do. But that's not what made Bikram famous, in my opinion. What made Bikram famous, and I talked about it in the first 3 parts, was his boyish charm, his passion for yoga, the way he encouraged and corrected his students.
He's so nice.
And I found that the new teachers, the new Bikram teachers, were not emulating that aspect of Bikram. They're emulating the disciplinarian, tough side of Bikram, and I have a theory why that is. There was a very interesting book, side note, of the Bikram world called Hell Bent. It was written by an author named Benjamin Lohr. And what was interesting about this book, Hell Bent, and if you haven't read it, go out and read it because it's really an interesting story. It's an inside track of what was happening with Bikram. And why I thought it was a fascinating story is because Benjamin Lohr wasn't an outsider doing a piece on Bikram yoga. Benjamin Lohr was actually part of the Bikram family. He went through the teacher training program. He was a fanatic Bikram student. So that was an interesting take coming from a fanatic Bikram student. Anyway, Ben had called me and I was in an airport. I was delayed in some airport and we did a long, it must have been a 3-hour interview on what it was like to be with Bikram back in the old days. A lot of the stories I conveyed to you in the first 3 parts, I mentioned in the book Hell Bent. And this is my theory about why the Bikram teachers were emulating Bikram's tough disciplinarian side and not the aspects of Bikram that really made him famous in Beverly Hills. When Bikram first started his teacher training programs in 1994, he had this huge studio on the 2nd floor, Wilshire Boulevard. The studio could fit like 150 people. So Bikram, when he first started doing his teacher training program, he only had like 40, 50 people. So he was combining the teacher training program people with his mainstream class. So now the teacher training people could watch Bikram teach his mainstream class. Somewhere around the year 2000, the Bikram teacher training programs really started to take off and he was getting 150, 180, 200 people and he couldn't combine his teacher training program people with his mainstream class. He ended up opening a new studio, huge facility out of Beverly Hills and Los Angeles Boulevard. I mean, Bikram really had no choice because his teacher training programs were getting massive, so he had to get a much bigger facility. So here's what I believe is the problem. From 1994 to the year 2000, 2001, whenever that transition happened before he moved, the teacher training people were watching Bikram teach his mainstream class. He's going to teach his mainstream class differently than he's going to teach a group of just teacher training people. For example, in his mainstream class, he's going to see like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's father, I believe, was in his late 80s, early 90s doing class. He had used the wall to help with his balance. He had a person with one arm. He had a person that was blind. He was then giving modifications for these students. He was also, his main thing was the passion for yoga. His main thing was entertaining people. He would get tough. If somebody stepped out of line, Bikram would get tough.
Because I am hard, you will not like me.
But that wasn't all he was. Bikram was fun and entertaining. And I talked about this in the last video. He would make you feel like $1 million with his encouragements. He would correct. He had an eye for correction. But he wasn't passing that on to his teacher training programs once he moved to La Cienega Boulevard, and let me explain why. Now, once again, this is my opinion. This is my theory, and take it or leave it. But this is what I feel happened. So now he moves to La Cienega. He's got 200, 250. He started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At one point, right before the fall from grace, he had like over 500 people in his teacher training programs.
That's a lot of people.
But now he's teaching just the teacher training people. Bikram had a different mindset. When he's teaching just the teacher trained people, he's not going to teach them like he is his regular mainstream class, giving all those modifications. When he's teaching just teachers, you want to teach Bikram yoga? I'm going to kick your ass. You want to do what Jimmy did and want to do what Emmy did? 3 or 4 classes a day. Back then they were only doing 2 in the teacher training program. It was tough. We never gave up. We were always right there. We were the elite. But now he's teaching everyone like they're the elite. Not at all empathetic, not at all offering modifications, because if you're going to be a teacher, I'm going to teach you differently than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's 90-year-old father. The modifications, the entertainment side wasn't there. So what happened was, and I'm sure he was entertaining during his teacher training program. I'm saying that he wasn't. But his main focus was the discipline. So now these teachers are coming out of the teacher training program and they're teaching everyone like it's a teacher training program, not a mainstream class. You see what I'm saying? Here was the disconnect. They were emulating Bikram's tough side and not the fun, entertaining side that made Bikram so famous. So now what Bikram was doing was raising a new breed of teachers. Back in the old days, when we were doing Bikram's apprenticeship program, we were taking 3 or 4 classes a day with Bikram for years and years and years.
Way too much.
We had more of an understanding of the practice than somebody coming in with just maybe a 6 to a 1 year practice and coming in for only a 9-week training program. Like I said before, at one point the senior Bikram teachers became wonderful communicators. I'm not saying all the Bikram teachers. I'm talking about the ones that just coming out of the teacher training programs. But back in the old days with Emmy and Tony, a guy named Rod Masterson eventually moved to Louisiana, and myself, we didn't have a script to memorize, what Bikram calls the dialogue. So here's what happens. This is the second part of my theory. Now everyone is now memorizing a script, because what Bikram wanted to do is create a Starbucks or a McDonald's. If you go to McDonald's in Paris or Berlin or Tokyo or Seattle, it's going to be the exact same product. It's going to be the exact same experience. However, Bikram did not want anybody to teach like he did. He had a very unique style. So now Bikram and I split in the year 2002, and I recently did a video on the breakup. So you can watch that video after you watch this one and talk all about why Bikram and I split. But now I started to create my own condensed teacher training program. And the first thing I wanted to do, I didn't want to give them a script to memorize. I wanted to go back to the old method where Emmy, Tony, and I, and Rod Masterson, we would create and calculate our own words. However, we knew the information so well that we would put our own sentences together and not copy Bikram's script or dialogue, which, by the way, was written in horrible English. One of the reasons why Bikram loved me so much, because I was one of the few people that could correct people and get away with it. I say, Bikram, you can't bring your hands, palms together. There's no other palm in the body but in the hands. Just palms together is fine. You don't have to say hands, palms, just to drive me nuts. Now, memorization is not an issue for you. It's actually easier to do it that way because you can sort of hide behind the words. Really not having an understanding, you don't have to have an understanding what the words mean if you're just reciting the dialogue word for word. This is the Barkan method teacher training programs. I want you to calculate your own words, addressing all of the necessary instructions, what we call in the teacher training programs bullet points. You have to address all the bullet points, but put together your own sentences. So at first, it's a little harder. First of all, standing up in front of a classroom and public speaking is one of the greatest fears. They say it's worse than spiders and even death. It's public speaking. So one of the things that people have a problem with when they first start, some people have a problem with when they first start the teacher training programs, is just getting over their self-consciousness. That's what I believe my calling is to this day. Helping teachers find their own authentic, unique sound or voice. Because it's easier said than done. That you have to calculate your own words. As a beginning teacher, you have a lot of things to think about. You've got all the bullet points and the commands to remember. You've got timing to understand. You have the room control. You have how your body and your words are moving together. So at first, it's a little difficult. Those become a given. The timing, the bullet points. Now we start to work on helping you find your own authentic sound, your own authentic voice. And in the Barkan Method teacher training programs, online and live, that's one of the things I do. I coach you to get over your nervousness, get over your self-consciousness, put the focus on them, get it off of you, because that's really what happens. You're thinking about how you're doing opposed to actually putting the focus on helping them in their yogic practice. So there's a different shift, there's a different intention. And the other thing I believe that Bikram did not teach his teachers in the teacher training program, and the senior Bikram teachers eventually came to it through their own experience over time, and that's correction. Helping students to find the exact alignment. And this is the great thing about yoga, really any yoga, especially in hot yoga, there's an exact position for everybody at every level, from raw beginners all the way to the ultra advanced students. So in the Barkan Method teacher training programs, we talk about correction all the time. In fact, in our online teacher training programs, every Thursday afternoon, United States Eastern Time, we have a live session. So you're not always by yourself on the online course. You can join the live sessions. And on the live sessions at the end, we play a game. And the game is called What's Wrong with This Picture? So I actually post pictures that I find on the internet each week, and we play a game with what's wrong with that picture. The leg is too high, the shoulders need to be dropped lower, the grip is too high. We don't do this game so we can make people wrong. We do this game so we can understand the proper alignment. So one, people won't hurt themselves, and two, get them on the right track to get them to the next level. If you could be working really hard, but if your leg is too low, you're not going to have the pendulum swing to straighten it out. So it's important to understand the exact correction, implement those corrections, and then convey it to your future students. I also encourage my teachers to encourage their students, to build them up. Sometimes you might have to say a little white lie. Look how wonderful you're doing. Look how wonderful you've improved. I used to always say, as you get more and more advanced in my class, the more sarcastic with you was actually the best compliment, because I expected more of you. If I was really nice to you, that means either you're a beginner or it's really not a good sign. If you're interested in taking the Barkan Method online course or live teacher training programs, I put the links in the description below. Click on the website, fill out the application, we can set up a Zoom call. You can start that day. We'd love to have you join the family. So my plan in teaching teachers was to help them find their own sound, their own unique voice, completely different than the Bikram world where everyone was sounding the same, reciting the script or the dialogue word for word. Now the teachers have their own unique style, their own unique sound, encouraging individuality, however staying true to the science, true to the form, true to the positions that we're teaching. So a whole new breed of hot yoga teachers out there in the Barkan Method, representing the style of yoga that came from Bikram to the United States, back to his teacher Vishnu Ghosh, his teacher before Paramahansa Yogananda. A whole new breed of teachers. So that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you want to learn all about hot yoga tutorials and flows and factoids, hit the subscribe button, like button right now, and I'll see you the next video. Bye, everyone.